Today I'd like to show you how I sharpen wood chisels. There are a lot of different things that you can sharpen with the same principles that I'm about to show you. Cold chisels are not one of them. This is a cold chisel, and you can see it's beveled on both sides. That's sharpened entirely different than a wood chisel, which is only sharpened on one side. And so wood chisels are similar to plane irons and that sort of tool, whereas cold chisels are similar to hatchets, axes, machetes, those sorts of tools where there are bevels on both sides. Now, when I sharpen a wood chisel, I'm going to actually hollow grind this surface to it. Whereas if you tried to hollow grind, say for instance a machete, which I have done, and the problem is there's not enough strength back in there. And so the first time you whack it on something heavy, you basically bend it or make a dip in the blade. So it's when you're doing something that's going to take a lot of force on it, like a hatchet, cold chisel, or whatever, you want to sharpen it like this one is, with a bevel on both sides and with it rounded. But in this case, we're going to do a wood chisel, and a wood chisel is actually going to be hollow ground. Now when you buy one of these from the store, very often it's flat ground. It's flat across there. It's actually a little harder to do that with a wood chisel than it is to hollow grind, unless you're sharpening this on a disc sander, which can be done, or a belt sander, which can be done. I'm going to be sharpening mine on a 6-inch grinder, as you can see here. Now, this 6-inch grinder has a fine wheel on it, and it turns at 3,450 RPMs. That's really faster than it probably should be, because when you grind this down, you're going to see that if you hold it against the wheel too long, because it's so thin, it's going to turn it blue, and that weakens the steel. So you don't want to do that. You want to continually quench that, which I have a little bucket of water here that I'm going to use to do that with. Now, one of the first things you want to do is you want to check to see whether or not the blade is square. You can hold a tri-square to it or whatever to see whether that's square or not. And if it's not, you should true that up before you begin this process. Once you get the blade square, then you start the grinding process. In order to get a good bevel on the chisel, you have to hold it a consistent distance from the grindstone. So what I like to do is I like to hold the chisel to the stone, and if you have to, look at it from the side and you can see whether it's matching up or not. You'll give it a couple of tries and see what happens when you look at it. But notice my finger is against the tool rest down here. That allows me to maintain the distance from the grinding wheel, and so I'm going to turn it on and show you how that's done. So you can see when you look at that it's ground evenly the whole way across. So I have it the right distance from the grinding wheel. You can also see, if you look carefully here, that it's already turned a little bit blue on that corner. You have to be careful of doing that. And the reason for that is because I've put a little more pressure on this side than on this side. You can see this one's out. This is already out to where it's thin, whereas this is still a little bit thick. You have to be careful with it doing that. Now, it's not a total loss if you do that. I've turned many of them blue, but it's best if you don't do that, just to keep the temper in the blade. So the harder you push the blade against the wheel, the more chance you have of burning it. So you want to take this off in a number of light passes than in trying to do it really hard on one pass. You also want to have a fine grindstone as opposed to a coarse one. Now once we get it down this far, Now we have to use a whetstone to finish sharpening it. Finding a good whetstone can be problematic. Hard to find good ones. There's a lot of cheap ones. This one is not terribly expensive, and it's okay, but it's not the best one on the market. If you get a whetstone and after you've used it for a while, the metal builds up in the pores and you need to clean them off. What I like to do is put a piece of really fine sandpaper or emery paper on a hard flat surface such as this table saw, and then just basically sand it. And that's going to open up the pores on the whetstone, which will allow it to be more effective. It's kind of like if you get sandpaper clogged, it doesn't sand anymore, and it's the same principle here. You can see I've cleaned that off a bit. Now I'm going to put a little bit of oil on there. They make a regular honing oil. It's made to do this job. I've found it pretty much any lightweight oil will do. 3-in-1 oil. I'm going to use a little hydraulic jack oil on this one actually. You can see it's a fairly fine oil. Okay, so we're going to sharpen both sides of this, but when we sharpen this side, this blade will lay dead flat on that stone. Whereas when we sharpen this side, we're going to hold it up to the side. Now you can go in little circles if you want to. You can go in long, even strokes. It's mostly you don't want to have it wiggling a lot and changing the angle a lot. I like to also do it to both ends of the stone if I can. Make sure to keep oil on it. And the reason for that is simply you want to wear the stone out consistently. You'll find a lot of old whetstones that are hollowed out in the middle, and the reason they're hollowed out in the middle is because the guy that used it never went out to the ends with the sharpening of it. Okay, so you sharpen it, and what you're trying to do here is you're going to see just a really light polished edge against there. Now when you get it to this point, you run your finger over the back side like I am right there, and there's a slight wire edge on there where it's rough from having done that. So now we have to buff that off by putting it down against there, and you can just work that around, and then you go back and forth between them. Now if you look carefully, you can sometimes see a little piece of wire in that oil, and that's because you've worked on both sides of that, and that little wire edge will come off of there. And it doesn't take a lot of work on this. The guy that I learned to do this from, he was very good, and he had a very good stone, and he had a very slow grinder so that he didn't burn the blades. And after he ground it down, he'd spend 2 or 3 minutes working this out like this, and when he was done, he could shave his arm dry. Now, it's either my technique or my stone. I like to think it's the stone that keeps me from being able to do it dry. But I can usually get it down to where I can shave the arm if it is wet. And we'll see here in a minute whether or not we can do that. Or when you have a chisel that will shave your arm wet, it's plenty sharp for cutting wood. This is a different stone. Ironically, my sister-in-law, who knows nothing about sharpening stones, bought this stone for me many years ago, and she got a good one. And so this one, I'm hoping that I'll be able to do a little shaving here once I get it done. So I don't know what the brand name is. I wouldn't know where to buy another one. The guy that taught me was actually from Italy, and he had brought his stone with him from Italy. There was no way to buy another one of them. So I don't know how to advise you as to where to buy a good stone. But frankly, most stones on the market will get your tool sharp enough, especially for the average woodworker, that they will be able to work fine for them. Okay, so now you can see I'm able to shave some hair off my arm. You can see there's actually hair there. And if you can get it that sharp, then you're going to be able to take a block of wood. Let me get a real block of wood here. Okay, so this is a piece of treated yellow pine, and you can see when you get it that sharp, you don't have any trouble taking little pieces off if you want to, or big pieces off if you need to. And that's the way you want to have your chisels, so that they will do that. Now if you do a plane iron, like a block plane or a one of the larger planes, you do it exactly the same way.
This shaving was done with a very sharp block plane. It can only be done if the blade is extremely sharp. This shaving was 4/1000ths of an inch thick, the thickness of a human hair. This is a block plane iron done the same way as I did the other ones on the same stone. And that one I could shave the back of my hand dry.
And so that's my lesson today for you on how to sharpen a chisel.